Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for intel, forecasts, and success strategies. Hello, I'm Michael Bull. Thank you for being with us. This segment is brought to you by CommercialAgentSuccess.com. It's video training for experienced commercial agent. Our show today is titled Site Selection in the New Economy. And if you run a business, lead a business, or involved in any way in commercial real estate, you'll realize that things have been changing. And we have a great guest for you today. We have Casey Conway. He's a MAI, he's a CRE, he's a CCIM, and he is also chief economist with CCIM Institute. He's joining us in Studio One today. Casey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
And you recently published a quarterly report, and let's talk about it. You're now doing the quarterly report for CCIM, right?
That's correct. We're putting a quarterly paper out in conjunction with the University of Alabama and the CCIM Institute.
Yeah. And you recently did a report, Amazon HQ2, a reset button for site selection. And of course, everyone's been following it. I guess the news is going to come out soon, right, of who they've picked. But also, as you've pointed out in this paper, it's going to really change site selection for companies around the U.S., hasn't it?
I think so. I think the process that Amazon went through here, not only did they get a lot of good free publicity out of it, but I think it is going to be a transformative process for site selection. And first thing Amazon did is they made everybody around the world and the United States do the homework for them, right? They said, tell us where we should go and why. Yeah. But I think secondly, it's really highlighting that what companies need today versus what they needed 20 years ago or even 10 years ago is very different. And it really is all about the workforce. And of course, what communities and cities need is they need to replace those kind of industries that are contracting, retail and financial services. So communities want to raise their hand and participate and attract those high-paying and good-growing technology companies. And those of us, say in the real estate business, we want to know where they're going and why they're going.
Right, and it's those new technologies, new kind of companies that are kind of going to lead growth really for brokers and for cities and for developers today, right?
It absolutely is. Yeah. And
yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned in this report, which I think is really interesting, is that companies are looking a lot at the culture, right, of the market that they're moving into.
Absolutely. So, you know, those that took the time to, say, read the Amazon's request for proposal, which is one of the strange things we decided was important to do. Yeah. I think a lot of people jumped in and tried to just handicap, you know, who were going to be the competitors without understanding. And so Amazon did a few things, and in that RFP, two of the most emphasized things were number one was we have a workforce problem. Mm-hmm. Number two was we have a unique culture, and where we go, we want that culture to fit very comfortably. So if you're, you know, polka dotted, wearing striped shirts and orange ties or whatever, that's totally okay with Amazon. And we don't want to go to a location where that's not acceptable. So that really is a big issue for them, and I think was maybe something that was underestimated in some of the competitors for the Amazon site.
Yeah, and you said there was 238 cities that responded.
So the other thing why it's always important to read the RFP is those of us in real estate know. So one of the first things in the RFP said we're really primarily focused on cities with 1 million and more in population. Well, there's only 53 of those, but we had 238 raise their hand and say, we want you here. And I think that was really telling. It wasn't that, you know, 180 something didn't read the RFP. It's that I think a lot of secondary cities that are growing rapidly, or that have a stereotype that hasn't been, you know, reset, or the image reset, wanted to raise their hand and say, you need to think of us in a different light. And my favorite example was Tucson, Arizona, right? They sent a cactus to Seattle. Well, Tucson wasn't thinking that, you know, Amazon was going to plant the cactus and try to grow it in rainy weather. What Tucson really wanted them to do is pay attention to Arizona, University of Arizona, and the kind of STEM workforce they're creating, and their infrastructure and supply chain and all of that type of stuff. And so I think those cities that were less than 1 million that competed are going to find that it was very beneficial to have done that.
Yeah, and then you have at the time of this article, and I guess you can update it a little bit, but you had kind of 8 cities that were kind of ones to watch?
Yeah. So when it first came out, it was September, I think first week of September, the RFP came out. And so I had to do a speech down in Tampa, Florida, the second or third week of September to the REAC group, Real Estate Investment Advisory Council. And they were hoping I was going to come down to Tampa and tell them that Tampa was going to be one of the contenders. And I had to tell them, not so much. One, we've just kind of getting ready to go through some hurricane stuff here, and that's probably going to be an issue. And so I threw out really my top 5 that I stuck with all along, never changed, and they were Atlanta and Northern Virginia, the DC region, to lose. I felt they checked the box on just about everything. They each had one minor, minus. Northern Virginia, a little bit expensive, cost of living not the cheapest compared to here to Atlanta. And Atlanta was really that awful C word, congestion. And then my wild cards were if Atlanta or Northern Virginia fumble the ball, that it might surprise people where I think that the next 3 contenders are. And they were Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Columbus, Ohio, and Nashville, Tennessee. And those that did their homework on looking at Amazon's culture, looking at the importance of supply chain and logistics to them, where the bulk of the middle market type companies that are at the heart of Amazon's business model, where those are located and whatnot, and then the workforce, the universities, Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh and Vanderbilt, you look at Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, that those 3 would be Pittsburgh, Columbus, and Nashville. And I said if there's a tie for 5th, I would throw Orlando in. If they're going to pick a Florida market, I really felt Orlando with airport, the University of Central Florida, the workforce, pulling all the workforce out of the Space Coast and NASA. So, and then, I think a lot of the others, I think the Carolinas are very strong contenders, but, they had a bathroom issue they're trying to get over. But it was pretty amazing to me that Raleigh got thrown into the final 20 mix. I felt Texas was a strong contender. I think if Amazon weren't really trying to get closer to the east and into an Eastern time zone, that places like Denver and Phoenix would have been a stronger contender. And I still think that Dallas is kind of a sleeper out there. That they've been very quietly under the radar. I think Miami's kind of a head fake. LA, no way. If they're trying to get out of the West Coast, they're not going to stay. Just go south.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned too in the report that I found very interesting, and I think even if you care nothing about the Amazon HQ2, I think just how they've done it, right, and what's important to companies today is important to all of us. And you mentioned a lot of companies are kind of looking east and kind of looking at maybe into that golden triangle.
Yeah, so we coined that term, the Golden Triangle. So if you look at a map of the U.S. in the Bureau of Economic Analysis breakdown of the 7 or 8 regions, if you triangulated the Great Lakes to southwest to the southeast, that triangulated region is about half of our U.S. GDP. It also, within that Golden Triangle region, is 80% of all corporate expansions, relocations, and new manufacturing announcements have been in that triangle in the last 3 years. It also is the home to the National Center for Middle Market Companies. So they're about 40% of GDP. These are those smaller companies that are, the institute was housed at Ohio State University, interesting, in Columbus, and incubated by Site Selection magazine. And these are the companies that are really growing from about 10 billion in revenue to 100 billion. And that's the heart of what Amazon wants to hit. They're the businesses that are growing rapidly. They're those unicorns that hit $1 billion in valuation and grow to super unicorns like an Amazon. And so they're really focused on that element.
Yeah, and that triangle runs all the way down, incorporates all of South Carolina, Georgia,
Florida, yeah, all the southeast.
Alabama, yeah.
Basically the south, really, if you just, almost the Carolinas, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and then all the way up really Ohio, you grab Pittsburgh and the kind of Pittsburgh, we adopted Pittsburgh into really the right part.
Yeah.
They're not part of the Northeast anymore.
Yeah, and when you look at picking a winner for investing in real estate or moving your company or building and developing real estate, I think in the old days maybe we kind of looked at affordability, right, and space and rates, and could you get a corporate headquarters building in a great location with low taxes, but it's really more now in the kind of the new economy about the workforce, isn't it?
You're absolutely interesting pickup on your part there. So if you think about it, it used to be, like my corporate facilities, my cost, the real estate conditions. So one of the things we looked at in the paper I followed for a long time is an old survey done by Atlas Van Lines. And so for 50 years they've been studying why companies relocate. And so it used to be very high, 1 or 2 real estate conditions were very high on there. And in the last 3 years, real estate conditions has fallen to the bottom of the top 5. And number 1 has been workforce. That 80% of the time why companies relocate is they're trying to get to that workforce. So that tells us the metrics are changing. It's not about concessions. It's not about the cheapest rent. It's not about demographics or traffic counts or any of that type stuff. Is if I get a great deal on a new headquarters building, it does me no good if I can't get my workforce there, because the real estate facilities, believe it or not, as you know, Michael, only account for maybe about 5% of the operating costs of a business. So if the bigger part is half of it's in your workforce, you got to get that right.
Yeah, well, that's well said, and you know, I think it's only going to become more important now as the unemployment continues to decrease. You know, we're probably going to have more wage growth. Wouldn't you expect, as economists, that now we'd have more wage growth as this job market gets tighter?
Absolutely, and you know, we talked a little earlier about one of my favorite things is, so all of you that are using, you know, the government made up monthly jobs report for your labor input model, it's time to retire it and put it somewhere else. One of my favorites today is LinkedIn. So 146 million of us have a LinkedIn account. It covers a span of about 50,000 skill sets, everything from, you know, welders to doctors, real estate professionals. And each month they break that down and they track what we're doing. And they're picking up over 3 million job changes that are happening every month across skill sets. And they now have a skill set gap analysis they do. And they show where the demand for certain skills are strongest and where they don't have that talent. So, you know, entities that are looking today, where do I get the talent that I need? They're deeply studying that. So it's not just kind of, Amazon's highlighting not just how you go out site selection, but maybe some of the metrics are really going to change now.
Yeah. So what should we think about if we're a city leader, economic leader in a city, or we own office buildings, or we're in commercial brokerage or law, and we're helping these companies and we're trying to help them get into the right locations, or maybe assume where are they going to go, where's going to be the strong growth? What should we think about differently than we maybe have in the past?
Yeah, I think sometimes, you know, in the past, I'm 33 years into my career, we kind of take for granted, you know, we'll go on, you know, old school Wikipedia or whatever and think we know about a company, or we'll read their, you know, their 10Q or 10K, and you can't begin to scratch the surface of really what's going on in that company. So I really encourage, step one, if you're a city or a community or a real estate broker that's really targeting or in the hunt for a company that's looking at expanding, go visit them, right? Sit down with some of the executives, see what the culture is. I mean, look at the office space here. It's a very different type of workforce. Look at, you know, things like congestion. Look at the universities. You know, look at the type of skill set. So you may have a great university, but it's not producing any of the STEM talent that a tech company needs. So I really encourage, go visit, go look at how they operate today. Spend some time in interviewing with what they don't like, what they're looking for, and understand a lot more about their changing dynamic of the workforce. Because many companies are transitioning today from the, you know, I call it AI-cation, the artificial intelligence process of taking over everything. And it means a different workforce. It means how we work, you know, what we can do, remote, the types of stuff, the types of space we need, the bandwidth that we need. And you really need to do your homework. I think the homework process is a lot more intense today.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, back to the HQ2 for a moment. Who do you pick as a winner? Who do you think is going to come out on top, or maybe the top three?
Yeah, so my top five hasn't changed, although one in my top five I've kind of disqualified. Unfortunately, I think Atlanta shot itself in the foot when I said it's Atlanta and Northern Virginia, DC's to lose. I think Atlanta, unfortunately, did shoot itself in the foot. It let itself get sucked in both between, you know, Delta responding to the, you know, NRA and the unfortunate shooting down in Florida, South Florida, and then our new lieutenant governor who wants to be governor weighing in with the legislature and taking away an incentive that really scared, you know, if you think about Amazon. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, Amazon's a fairly, you know, coming from a fairly liberal side of the country, a very all-inclusive culture. And you know, they're very concerned, how does that culture fit? And I think what the lieutenant governor did here in Georgia unfortunately scared the dickens out of them. It was worse than not allowing transgender bathrooms in North Carolina. Yeah. So I think Atlanta's out. I think it's Northern Virginia's to lose at this point. They checked the mark on so many things. It's going to come down, can they deliver on the site that connects them with Metro Transit? Yeah. Because the cost of living is such there, millennials are going to need to be able to shift transportation costs to housing costs. So if you can use Uber and Metro Transit, you don't have 10% of your income going to transportation, and you can put that into the housing. After that, I think it's really, I think that Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Columbus, Ohio, and Nashville, Tennessee are really a top 1, 2, 3 after Northern Virginia. I also think that Dallas is a very quiet sleeper that's sitting there. Dallas does a lot right. Texas does a lot right. The business environment's very good. And so I think, if they don't go completely east, I think if it's a western market, my bet's that it would probably be more like a Dallas and a Texas. Denver said they don't want it. I love a Phoenix, except they're just not in the right time zone, and they can't figure out which time zone they're in on going on and off daylight savings. But I think it's probably Northern Virginia's to lose at this point. And then I think Pittsburgh, Columbus, and Nashville are my 1, 2, 3 surprise picks.
Yeah, and one of the reasons you have so many cities, I guess, in the east is really about the kind of where the customers are for most any company, and the gross domestic product, everything that's kind of going on in the east and southeast.
Yeah, I have to tip my hat. You really read the paper deep. So one of the things we had deep in the paper was we looked at when companies relocate. Generally, companies like to be near their customers. So we said, well, why is Amazon doing a second headquarters? Most companies just have one. Why do they need a second one? And what we discovered was Amazon has about 860,000 business customers in the western United States. So from Denver and the Rocky Mountains all the way west. In the east, just on the East Coast states, they have more than that. They're at 865,000. And then if you throw in the central part of the country, really that, Pittsburgh, Columbus, all the way down through the Mid-South to the Gulf, there's over another 500,000. So Amazon today has between 1.3 million and 1.4 million business customers in the central midsection of the U.S., Midwest, and the East, compared to 860,000. And the growth rate, if you're in that golden triangle, which is that area, and that's where companies are expanding, that's where your National Center for Middle Market, that's where your heart of growing 10 billion to 100 billion companies are, it really makes sense. That's where you're going to be. And it also, if you look at the universities and the cost of education, so if you're trying to get that STEM workforce, and they're coming out of a Massachusetts university or a California university, they're coming out with a lot of student loan debt, very expensive. They come out of a university like here in Atlanta with a Hope Scholarship, where if you get a B+ average through high school, you get a free ride through the tuition bill. So you come out of, say, a Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, or you go through some of the Florida schools that have a similar type program, and you're almost debt-free, and you got that talent. So your workforce, not only is it there in place, it's coming out relatively debt-free, it's very affordable, and they're pretty close to international airports. They like to travel and go anywhere they want. So.
Yeah, and if that's the number one issue, and it seems like it's going to grow with workforce and getting workforce, that seems like it's going to continue. What about the expansion of the ports on the East Coast? Does that have anything to do with relocation today?
I think it does. So for a long time, it goes back to my days at Colliers. I was their chief economist. And we developed a number of years ago as the Panama Canal expansion started. What's really going on? Is it really a driver? Is it really going to change LA and Long Beach and the West Coast? And it was really more complicated than that. And so I believe we're in the process of remaking our whole supply chain. And we're going from one that was concentric in the West Coast to more the East Coast. So all of our ports have been deepening, modernizing. We have right to work states, so we don't have the same union issues that they've encountered in California. And so when you look at what's happening in our ports, and also access to the Suez Canal, which is it's actually growing faster than the Panama Canal that it's expanded. So we're a straight shot, we're more efficient, we're about 40 to 50% less cost. And the other thing that's interesting is if you go back to, if 70% of the U.S. population lives east of the Ohio-Mississippi Valley, and it's been that way since World War II, why did we put a supply chain in Southern California? Well, it was kind of after World War II. If you think about it, after World War II, we had this new thing called an interstate system, so trucking worked really well. We didn't have any people driving on it because we were still driving on Route 66. So if a truck driver fell asleep for 10, 15 minutes, he didn't kill anybody. Today, they blink their eyes, and they've just killed about 10 people. We didn't have an EPA, so diesel emissions wasn't a big deal. And think about, what was e-commerce coming out of World War II? It was a Sears catalog, right? What is it today? It's in Memphis, Tennessee, and Louisville, Kentucky, where UPS and FedEx are. So everything we're trying to do is connect through that, and we're shifting from trucking as a mode of transit, right, with all the problems in trucking, to rail. And all but one of our 7 Class 1 railroads moved from Canada through the Great Lakes on down into the Gulf and the East Coast. So if we're moving and having more dependence on rail, and you need more of that intermodal connectivity, really the mid part of the country from the Great Lakes down to the Southeast is where it's at. So again, I think Amazon's all about logistics, it's efficiency. It's not just stuff in a department store. They're moving into grocery, they're moving into media. I mean, they're going to move into everything, and where that population and growth is where they're going to want to be. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about economy, interest rates. I mean, if you're running a business, you kind of want to get a prediction on the economy. With you being here an economist, especially now with your CCIM leadership. I want to get your take on that. But we're going to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll have more on the economy, on interest rates, and what to expect moving forward. Stay with us. I'm Michael Bull, and this is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.